Welcome to the Walaway. This is Imran Narmawala, and once again, we're going to be talking about the San Antonio Spurs, Steven Jackson of all the smoke. And for whatever reason, Steven Jackson cannot stop disparaging the Spurs. He's been taking some shots, in my opinion, and I'm going to make it clear again. I'm a big Steven Jackson fan, one of my all-time favorite players, famous model, make love to pressure, always hitting the big shots in the big moments. But for whatever reason, we see this back and forth when it comes to talking about the Spurs. A lot of good, and then the very opposite in terms of the same things that he gives him credit for, then he'll discredit him for. So let's take a look at a latest clip he had.
This was practice. So I had great practice. I wasn't playing as much in the game, so I used practice as my game. And I was busting their ass, completely busting their ass. Tim Duncan loved, he loved every bit of it because that's how players who went on the city. So for my practice, I had a great practice. I'm picking for the play in the next couple of minutes. Playoff for the start. I go to the practice room. He sit me down and show me my three worst possessions of the home scene. Not a million big plays I had, but three bad plays, and he had to both get paid to find, right? And the show me all the possession. He's like, I'm a ring the team in. I want you to be that better ring to know they're better than you. Because I'm going to play in the playoff.
As we have a conversation, chasing the ring and waiting and starting to tumble it. So we love it. We love the lad. We all like to do one break, fall out.
So what he's insinuating here is essentially that Pop and the Spurs set him up. They knew how he would respond to the situation the Spurs were putting him in by asking him to admit that two players were better than him and that he would essentially disqualify himself from the situation. And they knew he would do that, and that's why Tracy McGrady was already on his way in while he was still on the team. So there's a lot of things that we have to take at face value that we can't double-check. We can't double-check whether Tim Duncan loved it or not, right? I do believe, Tim Duncan has said that Stack is one of his favorite players of all time. I believe that. I do believe that Pop probably pulled him into an office, but we can read the reports, right? We can read that there was already friction building. We know Steven Jackson had been on multiple teams. We know about the issues on and off the court. We know that there's some things that have to do with chemistry, and you got to maintain chemistry. So in that year, Stack is playing less minutes. His shooting percentage from three and from field goal are down into the 30s, I believe. And Ginobili and Danny Green are shooting a higher percentage. Now, let's say he is busting their butts in practice and he's talking a lot. If he's talking to the extent where it's going to affect team morale, sometimes as a coach, you got to make a decision. But let's go ahead and let's look at some of the things that we can find online that kind of refute some of this, right? So let's go to this USA Today article, and Steven Jackson cut loose before the playoffs by the Spurs. Now, even when it happened, and I've talked about this previously years ago, it caught a lot of Spurs fans off guard. We were surprised. Tim Duncan was surprised. The Spurs were surprised. I personally would love to have had Steven Jackson on that team in 2013. They play Miami. I think he could have had some valuable minutes in the playoffs and the finals, and I think it would have worked out well. But we know that Popovich is an ultimate winner. He's going to do what's best for the team, and his ultimate goal is winning a championship. So we got to give Coach some props as well. So here, the first few paragraphs just mention what happens. He was cut. Jackson's playing time had fluctuated this season. At one point, had the support of the Spurs management, including Coach Pop. But if anything is given with the Spurs, it's that players buy into a system and culture, and the franchise has no problem jettisoning players who don't. So if you're not buying in, the Spurs are going to get rid of you. Jackson, who was not always easy to deal with, had been butting heads on and off with Popovich since February, but the friction grew last week, so the Spurs eliminated a potential problem. So, according to USA Today, friction had been building for months prior. Unhappy with Jackson earlier in the season, Spurs officials met with him before March 1st, and the situation was resolved, albeit temporarily. So they met, they gave him a chance, and it was fixed. The combustible Jackson. So again, USA Today is using subjective language. I'm not going to say he was combustible. We're just going to say Jackson played for the Spurs early in his career, and San Antonio knew what it was getting. And I agree. The Spurs knew what they were getting, right? We know about the Palace and the Malice that happened before the Spurs picked him up. We know about the thing that happened in Indiana involving police, involving some other individuals, but they still traded for him. They gave him a chance, which contradicts what he was saying with DeJounte Murray. that the Spurs try to not pick up players like this, and they don't want players like this. Doesn't seem accurate. The decision to waive Jackson was strategic, which I agree. Had San Antonio waived Jackson before March 1st, he could have been playoff eligible and could have ended up playing against the Spurs in the postseason. So yeah, that's what happened. And Jackson was averaging 6 points, 6.2 points, 2.8 rebounds, and 1.5 assists in about 20 minutes a game. So he was getting playing time, right? He was complaining about not getting any playing time, saying he didn't play the whole season. He was getting about 20 minutes a game, which is really good in 55 appearances, right? So let's dig further. Why is this interesting? Why is this ironic? There's a very specific reason. So here we go. So another article from Bleacher Report, right? And Steven Jackson, again, it's the same thing. What happened with the Spurs? And he left. It was abrupt. His shooting from the field was 37.3% during his 20 minutes or so in game. Mostly his release had to do with Pop Jackson wouldn't play his mind games. By mind games, Jackson, of course, means he wouldn't surrender to the truth. I would never say a player is better than me when I know they're not. Again, that's the Ginobili and Danny Green situation. We don't know what really happened there, but we know that Danny Green had like a finals record in 2013 of the most three-pointers made in the finals. Manu Ginobili had a little bit of a disappointing postseason that year. But again, statistically, they were doing much better than Jackson. And then Bleacher Report mentions how pride is a dangerous thing and humility could have kept him on the team. Again, we're not going to touch that. Now, this is the part I want to emphasize on, and Steven Jackson has said this multiple times before. I wouldn't want me on the team either. And this is not the first time I've heard him say this, right? When he referred to this situation, he was talking about how this was best for him and best for the team because he probably would have done something crazy. So on one hand, you're saying they cut me for the right reasons. I was probably going to do something crazy. And then on the other hand, you're saying it's mind games and they were trying to have me eliminate myself. So in reality is if Jackson had just toned it down just a little bit, I think it was like 35 at that time. Was he 35? He was roughly 34, 35 years of age at that time. And for a wing or a shooting guard, that's old, right? So I think he could have done something much more wiser and tuned down some of the way he was behaving, and he would have been on that team. Now, let's go to another clip, and I hope the audio comes clear and through. In 2017, he's talking about his experience with the Spurs. So this is 3-4 years after he's cut. This is 3-4 years after this article was written. Let's see what he says. And this is a podcast that I did. I'm going to put the link below. I did a 40-minute breakdown on why the Spurs are a world-class organization. And we talk about so many things in detail. I use nuance. I use examples and quotes and stats. Check it out. I'll put the link in the comments or somewhere in the description.
It sounds so simple. It really does. You're prepared, do your job, figure it out. Why don't other organizations do it? I mean, you played for so many other organizations. Why don't others do what you're describing?
Perfect example. This is why Pop would rather a Kawhi Leonard than a James Harden, because he know this guy's going to play hard on both ends of the court. He's not worrying about scoring points. He's not worried about being fat, being a fashion guy. Pop wants guys that love the game of basketball, and that's going to play the right way. And you see all these things.
Pause, right? So what is he saying? Pop loves guys who love the game of basketball, which Steven Jackson does, and play the game the right way. Part of playing the game the right way is supporting your teammates, adding to team camaraderie, working on team chemistry, not going back and forth with your coaches at all times. I'm not saying that should never be allowed, but you got to understand, while Steven Jackson comes from a particular background and we get it, he gets it, Pop might get it, he may rub off on the younger players, right? He may rub some of the international guys in the wrong way because that cultural nuance is not that cultural understanding on both sides. So I'm not blaming Steven Jackson, right? But he himself admitted how the Spurs and why the Spurs are a world-class team. Let's keep going.
Teams that skipped out on Kawhi. You see all the teams that didn't sign me. He knows those certain guys that he can bring in that's going to be glue guys and that's going to play the game and play the game the right way.
So bring in guys who are going to be glue guys, right? So in practice, if you're going after your teammates, and again, part of trash talk is part of basketball. Everybody knows that. But you also know that there's a limit with your own team, right? You don't talk to your team like you talk to your opponents. Let's keep going.
Right way. And he'll skip on a James Harden 10 times for a Kawhi.
So I'm not sure what else there is to say, but he's kind of gone back and forth, right? He'll praise them. Even after they cut him, he praised them. He praised the organization. He said he was happy for them. He said they should have cut me. I was probably going to do something crazy. Fast forward 5, 6, 7 years, mind games, self-sabotage, intentional sabotage. They don't know how to manage players like myself and DeJounte Murray. It's interesting, right? Spurs 5-time champions in a small market. Popovich has an amazing reputation of being a team builder, of being a first-class leader, of getting guys to buy in. Manu Ginobili, a guy who could have scored 30 in this league, and I don't care what anybody says. If you know the game of basketball, you know Manu could have put up between 25 and 30 if he was getting the minutes. A Olympian, Olympic gold medal champion, a 4-time NBA champion, a EuroLeague champion, a EuroLeague MVP, comes off the bench, no problem, right? So he's a leader. He's a great coach, one of the best. He knows how to get players to buy in. But then there's a certain level of what you don't tolerate. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are in terms of Stephen Jackson's continual remarks regarding the Spurs in a negative way. And we'll see you next time.